It's the time of your life, so live it well. Ants are members of the family Formicidae, which is a member of the order Hymenoptera, which also includes bees and wasps, the latter of which ants are actually pretty closely related to. And ants, like bees and wasps, are eusocial animals. They live in these massive colonies. They're actually the most eusocial of all the members of the Hymenoptera. The only animals that come close to ants are termites, which may even surpass ants. And ants are pretty impressive animals. They're known to be able to carry loads much heavier than their own body weights. They're able to travel quite vast distances for their size. They're actually quite fast for their size as well. I think the silver ants in Northern Africa have been noted to basically be travelling faster than, like, Usain Bolt would be if he was the size of an ant. Ants are also the most abundant animals on Earth. If you were going by the number of individuals rather than the number of species, ants vastly outweigh any other animal with regards to biomass. And considering insects are the most abundant types of life on Earth, it is entirely plausible that ants are the most abundant types of life on Earth. So eusocial animals are animals that live in vast colonies, whereby there's one individual at the top, usually a queen, which will basically be the only one that reproduces. Everyone in the colony is the offspring of that one individual, and there's various castes, like in ants, there's workers, soldiers, and it's a pretty utopian existence, almost. Everyone kind of has a job to do, and they all do it pretty well, because they're only doing that, and they're doing everything to the benefit of the colony. And because we live in a kind of similar way to ants, there is a lot of overlap and similarities, but ants tackle them in a very different way. For instance, ants aren't visual animals. They don't communicate through sound. They communicate primarily through pheromones, and they use that to have quite complex communications between each other. And these chemical messages are pretty efficient. Like if one foraging ant discovers a food source that's quite a bit away from the colony, it's able to send out a signal that the others can detect and then go out and also reap the rewards of this. They've also got their own unique form of intelligence. Individual ants are not particularly intelligent, because, why would they be? But en masse, they actually are. They're quite good at solving problems. There's that famous footage of the ants that are able to form rafts in flooded forests to cross the water and get to dry land. And that's not something that an individual ant will come up with on its own, but en masse, they seem to be able to, work these things out. And ants are also involved in quite a lot of mutualistic relationships with other organisms. Like acacia trees in Africa will secrete sap to attract ants that will then deter other leaf eaters from feeding on it. Quite interesting. And ants even engage in a bit of agriculture. Leafcutter and grasscutter ants both feed on fungus, and in order to grow this fungus, they will carry back vast amounts of vegetation, loads of chopped up leaves, loads of grass stems that they can't even eat, but they feed it to the fungus so then they can feed on it. And this specific type of fungus only grows in ant nests, and ants will even farm other animals. Ants have been known to care for caterpillars of moths and butterflies, and even more impressive than that is the relationship between certain ants and aphids. So ants will kind of herd aphids and look after them, protect them from other predators, and in return, the aphids will secrete a type of sugary substance that the ants feed on, and these aphids will only secrete this substance in the presence of ants. So again, this has directly impacted the evolution of both individual parties. Very interesting. Like, ants are probably involved in more mutualistic relationships than any other type of animal that I can think of off the top of my head. But not all ants are harmonious. You get really scary ones. You get the army ants in the Americas and driver ants in Africa. And they are, pretty intimidating organisms. Again, because ants are super organisms and they live in big colonies, en masse, they are very intimidating. There's loads of footage of army ants crossing the forest and just killing everything in their path. And sleeping humans have been killed by these types of ants in the past. So yeah, ants, while being really interesting, really clever, can actually be really scary when they want to as well. The most painful sting in the animal kingdom belongs to the bullet ant, which again, also pretty intimidating, shows you how closely related they are to wasps as well. And bullet ant stings have been used in various tribal rituals, like it's a rite of passage in certain parts of Central America for young men to either have their hand in a sort of makeshift glove full of bullet ants, or to actually just have them draped all over their body. So actually they're quite important for certain cultures. And I think for us, ants are usually regarded as pests. We generally don't like them when they get into our houses. It's usually a sign of uncleanliness when you see a row of foraging ants inside a home. And people use insecticides inside to primarily get rid of things like ants. People don't really like them. But to be honest, I'm not really sure what devastation they cause. Is it just because it's a sign that somewhere is a bit unclean that there's ants? Or do they actually cause any damage? Because compared to other animals that we regard as pests, I don't really think ants cause that much bother. I think we just don't like them inside, which is kind of weird. I mean, you get things like flying ants, like, flying ant day is a big thing people go on about. But I've seen winged ants emerge a few times, and it's pretty cool. I just find it really fascinating. I don't really get people's problems with ants, to be honest. I think they're just pretty cool. I'm just quite happy to watch them. But while we think of them as pests in real life, when it comes to pop culture and the way we portray ants and think of them in that sense, we generally hold them in quite a high regard. We think of them as being quite admirable because we see them as really hard working. That idea of the ant colony has been a really efficient thing. It's kind of almost an embodiment of that notion of if you work hard, you can achieve something. If you look at ants in media, they're generally portrayed as the underdogs, the good guys, things like The Bug's Life or Ants or Ant Bully. You know, if you remember that film, like ants are always the good guys that are kind of downtrodden by someone else, whether it be grasshoppers or termites or humans. Like we find them pretty sympathetic in that sense. So while I think we do generally regard them as pests in real life, we do kind of like them on some level. And I find it interesting that we kind of live pretty similarly to ants. We don't really live like any other animal, certainly not like any other mammal. We live in these kind of vast cities, these vast kind of super societies, I guess, although it's not as cohesive as an ant society. If you were going to directly compare them, we live in vast colonies where everyone has a job to do. But while ants are doing all these jobs for the good of the colony, and specifically the good of the queen, the top of the colony, in which everyone benefits, we don't really have that. We don't really have a clear overlord unless you live in an authoritarian state. In a way, we're kind of doing all these jobs a little bit aimlessly, and I think it's quite indicative of the way we live, that we have so many mental health issues. I think people that live in a more natural setting than a big town and city are probably happier generally than most of us are. Like a lot of people have anxieties, depression, things like that are kind of probably as a result of living a fairly unnatural life that we've just not evolved to deal with. However, unlike us, ants have evolved to live like this, and they do it pretty well. They're very successful at it. Somehow, I don't think ants are suffering from mental health issues in the same way that we are. So maybe in a way, this whole super society that we've chosen to live in, this vast, almost homogenous colony, is something that ants can hack just a lot better than we can. So maybe we could learn a thing or two from ants, or maybe we should just learn that we're actually not ants, and this is simply not a way that we are supposed to live. So yeah, to summarise, ants are pretty cool. I really like ants. Ants are probably my favourite insect, I think. I remember when I was in uni, I did a project on ants where I basically had to sit outside and observe ant foraging behaviour, count the number of ants that went to different food sources, and while that might sound really boring, I find it really cool. It's just really peaceful watching these ants just go about their lives. I find them really watchable, like more so than a lot of other insects. I could just watch them for hours, and I literally have. So yeah, overall, ants, really cool animals, really impressive animals. We don't like them, but we also do in a way, and we've indirectly chosen to live like them. Although ants have clearly made a much better go at that kind of lifestyle than we have. So yeah, let me know in the comments below what you thought of this video. What did you think of ants? Do you have any ant stories? Let me know. And let me know if there's any future insects you'd like me to talk about. There's plenty of them out there, so let me know. And yeah, as ever, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, or don't if you don't want it. It's perfectly fine. And I'll see you next time, and goodbye.